Good morning, good morning. My name is Stacey Carswell, and I am one of the government engagement directors here at GovRAMP. This is so lovely to see so many familiar faces, so many new faces, so we're super excited to have you here. So for our first panel of the day, we'll feature Tales from the Cyber Frontline. Stakeholders from different viewpoints will debrief the event, highlighting what they wish they would have known, who they should have called, because it's definitely not Ghostbusters, and what they would do differently next time. So please welcome to the stage Moderator Ken Morris, who is the Senior Security Advisor at RAMPxchange. He is joined by our panelists, Jeff Maxon, Chief Information Technology Officer of Kansas, and Dan Lohrmann, Field CISO for the Public Sector at Presidio, and Michigan's former CISO, CTO, and CISO. And as an aside, if you want to learn more about any of today's speakers, you can scan the QR code for some bios. Ken, the stage is yours.
I want to address a couple things first. I'm aware of my presence. Thank you, Noah. I know I look like a federal agent, but I have no badge to work on. This person. Second thing, Mr. Sloan did say good morning. That's pretty weak, so I'm going to try it again. So, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's try one more time. Good morning. Good morning. This is so awesome. As Stacey said, I am Ken. I'm with the RAMPxchange, cybersecurity and risk management marketplace. I have a few guests on stage. Our panel today is about Tales from the Cyber Frontline incidents, and the panelists here have a unique perspective as they were both stakeholders in the incident, its response, and lessons they learned. So I would like the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Jeff. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Jeff Maxon. I'm the Chief Information Technology Officer for the state of Kansas, essentially the state CIO. Prior to this role, I did serve as the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Kansas for about 3 years. So a lot of what I'll talk about is from my experience as a CISO, but then leaning on as the CIO, what I have to do on the IT side to support the cybersecurity.
Yeah, good morning. Dan Lohrmann. I am Field CISO with Presidio. Started my career at NSA in Washington, and I was 17 years in Michigan government. So the stories I'm going to share are from my time as CISO in the state of Michigan.
All right, fantastic. So again, this panel is about addressing incidents as they happen from the front lines with unique stakeholders. So we're going to start off with a question. The question is, what are some things, tell us about an incident. And my understanding is you have this wonderful Amazon bestseller book called Cyber Mayday that has over 30 ransomware stories in it. So how did you pick this story about to tell us?
Yeah, so the story is about the blackout of 2003. And you may wonder, how many of you actually lost power during the blackout? That was a long time ago, 2003, so few of you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story of what happened, and I picked it because there's side components to it, but it really informed all the other stories in the book and had the biggest impact nationwide, really. And 50 million people were impacted by that blackout across 7 states and Ontario. It was a big incident that got on. It's actually the biggest blackout in U.S. history.
So tell us about the response and right?
Sure, yeah. So the story basically happened in August of 2003. So I was the emergency management coordinator for the Michigan Department of Information Technology and the state CISO. So I was in that role. When it actually first happened, just to give you some background, I was in downtown Lansing. The lights went out. It was hot August 14, 2003, a hot afternoon. The lights flickered, but they went out. You can still see light through the window. We all kind of, everyone kind of looked at each other. The maybe power's going to come back. It didn't. The meeting ended about 4 o'clock. We just went outside. But you could right away, there's a tension in the air. You could feel like, remember, this is 2 years after 9/11. So everyone's kind of looking up, looking at the sky. And there was tension, there were people scurrying around, the lights were all off. We actually went into trying to get to my car was on the 5th floor of a parking garage. And just trying to get out of that parking garage took a half an hour. A lot of fender benders, people scurrying around, people trying to self-direct themselves to direct traffic. as I'm driving to the State Emergency Coordination Center, because I was our emergency coordinator for the Michigan Department of Information Technology, which ran all the IT for the state of Michigan at the time, the radio actually said PBS, so this was, people think, fake news and all that is recent, and certainly there's been a lot of that in the last 10 years, but the incident, I'm driving to the State Coordination Center, and the radio said, we think this is a national terrorist incident like 9/11, and there's been bombings in Washington, which was not true. But this is all things considered. Michigan Public Radio was saying this. So there's a lot of misinformation. People get to the Emergency Coordination Center. We get there, everyone's scurrying around. There's 3 quick things I'll say right out off the gate that really shocked me. Number 1 was only about 1/3 of the people we thought were going to show up showed up. And over the next 24, we basically spent over 4 days there in that emergency center. And over the next 24 hours, it was really still only got to about 50% of them going to show up. Now, some of those people were on vacation. It's August, right? The person who's supposed to run this from the Michigan Department of Emergency Management, Captain John Horton, was on vacation down in Mexico. So a lot of people were on vacation. By the way, a little side note, the lieutenant who ran the incident, she became colonel later at one Michigan State Police, Christy Etching. So if you do really well during incidents, it becomes really well. So it can turn out really well for you. But a lot of them didn't show up. Second was communications. How do you contact people? How do you communicate in an incident? Phones weren't working. There were a lot of landlines, and the landlines were working, but people weren't on the other end of the phone. So you try and call people. We had 800 megahertz radios, but nobody was using those. It was like, nobody knew where they were. So how do you communicate with people? You think, well, the networks were all down. And so the third thing I would say right off the bat was the generators. Our main command center where we were meeting had generators, but our 2 biggest data centers did not have generators at the time. And so the state at that time had 40 data centers. 1 had power. And so all the desktops were without power. All the people you were trying to communicate did not have power. So how were you going to communicate with them? The networks were all down, the email was down. Could you communicate? We actually ran our state portal from Boulder, Colorado, and that was actually down. We had no way to communicate with Boulder, Colorado because the links were down in Boulder, Colorado. So how were we going to get information out? So these were all things that were challenges that we faced, in those first hours.
That sounds rough. Also, I think at the timeline, 2003, I recall iPhone out then, so real difficult. Which brings me to my next point is I understand how communications can fail. It's obviously hard to predict the amount of generators you're going to need for powering the entire state's data centers. But why do you think there was such a low turnout? I know you mentioned vacations and things like that, and people are unreachable. But we're talking about preparation for this. Can you speak to why the turnout was so low?
Yeah, so great question. And by the way, I've talked since then, and back to the cyber, and a lot of the ransomware incidents, I've talked to Fulton County, Georgia, a lot of other people. Interestingly enough, that same trend is hit on a lot of ransomware attacks and cyber attacks around the country. When things really go south, like, it was amazing. I just compared those with some people out in California and Utah, and we were talking about this. Only 1/3 of people showed up for those events as well. You never know how people are going to react in an emergency. A lot of people are like, I gotta go home, I gotta take care of my family. And my family doesn't have power, my wife just called, the air conditioning's down, of course, because there's no power. So you think, and I love the line from Mike Tyson, but everyone thinks they have a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so it's like, when something happens like that, you think you're prepared. We've done 3 exercises, we had just come through Y2K. People knew where to go. It wasn't like they didn't know where to go, what to do, what their responsibilities were. But when it actually hits, it's like people go into this mode where they have to be there. Over the next couple of days, by the time we got to like Sunday, 2/3 of people showed up. 1/3 of the people never showed up until it was way over. They came up with different reasons why I had to take leave that day or this or that, and it's very, very hard. But I think a lot of it is the people issues that you think you're prepared for. Even, and I'll just say one other example, when we do tabletop exercises, a lot of times, it's Tuesday morning, the coffee's hot, the donuts are cold, everything's great, the food's great, everyone's there, they're prepared. one of the lessons learned, I'll just say it off the top right now, I was going to share later, but is we actually do tabletops now. One of the things we do is we go around and tap a third of the people on the shoulder and say, you're off for the day. And people are like shocked, what do you mean I'm off for the day? Well, you can either watch from the side or you can go back to your office. You're not here. Well, where am I? You're going down the Rhine River with your family. You're doing a cruise, Viking cruise down, but you're not here right now, right? People are shocked by that. And they're like, no, and it often happens. It's kind of funny. Within about 5 minutes, people come up to you during the exercise and say, you know, you picked Frank. You know, he's our head guy. I don't know how you picked him. You must have known that, you know, Frank was the guy we need, right? And you picked this guy. Can you swap Stacy, the intern, for Frank? Because we want to start trading. But no. Frank is on the Viking cruise going down the Rhine River. You're going to be stuck with Stacy. No, I mean, whatever it is, but that challenge of knowing who's going to show up, having backups, having people who are redundant, you know, who can back you up is a big challenge.
Okay, excellent. I do want to make a point though. You mentioned how people don't know how to respond to emergency. Very good friend of mine is a firefighter. He told me a trick one time. He said, if you ever watch a live fire, firefighters never run. They walk in ready. They don't need to bring the agitation. So I said, a nugget I'll give to everybody here. So, excellent points. Knowing those things now, how could you possibly gain insight into knowing those things are going to fail? You know, hey, we're going to be out, we're going to have inability to power data centers. How could you possibly gain insight prior to this?
Yeah, and I think scenario-based planning, people talk about scenarios, but there's always this challenge in our field, in cyber emergencies as well. You don't know how far to take something. Like people said, well, we've had a situation where, you know, this building is out or half the city has lost power, but there had never been a scenario where the whole northeast of the United States had lost power. So we had never had that specific scenario. So scenario-based planning, better thought about comms. You know, we kind of, we thought about, and by the way, one of the good news that came out of this, we got money, you know, because of the generator issue, we went to the top of the Homeland Security list for grant funding. We were able to get generators for all of our critical data centers. The next year, we had a mid-Michigan ice storm, just hit Michigan, it didn't hit the rest of the country, that lost power for big parts of the state, but because of those generators, we were able to keep government up and running. So one of the big lessons learned was follow up with your action items. So many organizations in cyber attacks and technical attacks, they come up with these lists of best practices where they know what to do, but they don't actually follow through and do them. So, you know, getting generators, thinking through email being down. Okay, the servers were up in some cases, but the people who had the PCs and laptops couldn't connect to them. What are we going to do about that? Having better scenarios, scenario-based planning would have helped a lot.
Plan for the unexpected. Okay. Well, I think that's an excellent insight. You know, expanding, you know, the scenario beyond your work capabilities helps kind of highlight which of the gaps may be illuminated in that situation. Jeff, do you have anything somewhere you want to share with us?
Yeah, so nothing as grand as what Dan talked about, but a lot of the themes are the same as what you signed. So over the years, I'm going to kind of pull two incidents together that almost every cyber incident, there's a degree of this is novel. You know, where we detect it, where we identify it as at different stages of the attack, the parties involved, especially at state government level, different stakeholders. And so we have two incidents that the attack vectors were very similar. One was a criminal actor, one was a nation state actor. And one we caught kind of coming in, we had just installed an EDR system, so we're still tuning in. We got an alert, we're trying to figure out, okay, is this just abnormal? What is it? But then we had a third party alert us that their tool picked up something as well. What it was somebody trying to dump the credentials for the domain controller. So the response to that is very quickly buy-in from leadership. We need to shut this down immediately, no questions asked. Other incident, we kind of ran through very similar. Came in through a web shell. We identified it right when it entered, right when it started, and sent a request over to the agency. Hey, we're seeing this. This could be an update. Are you guys doing anything? We didn't get any response. A couple days passed. We start seeing the lateral movement. So then we start upping because we inject ourselves. This is an incident. We need to start investigating. So lesson one, obviously, communication is huge. So when you're engaging leadership, a breach is an incident, but an incident is not a breach. When you say breach, you get very different responses from leadership across the government spectrum. So learning early vocabulary is very important when you're engaging non-IT folks. Has been huge, but we're always working to try and make responding against tabletops. We want to make things as routine as possible, but that is not always the case. Leveraging our tools, different at times, we're always modifying and trying to mature our operations so we can detect things at the earliest level possible. But how do we engage folks when we go through certain pieces? Like when we identify the one at the entry point on the web server, is this normal? So we're trying to get feedback from the agency. They might not respond because, I'll get around to this when I get around to this. Then we kind of start escalating. But you're going to get people kind of, this isn't quite a priority for me until you start kind of coming in, the sky's falling kind of situation. But as we work through those, trying to build the relationships and trying to communicate and understand there's different personalities involved and how different people respond to different situations. So our first where, leadership said, absolutely cut it, no issues, get it resolved. Other second situation we were talking earlier, well, how long are we down for? Why can't we keep our systems up? Why are we trying to get, the whys keep coming when you're detecting earlier in the stage. So how do we answer those questions so we convey that? And kind of one of the things we've done in the state over the years is, to Dan's point of kind of limiting who's participating. So we started doing tabletop exercise with just agency leadership and said, no, you cannot bring your CIOs to this conversation because these are decisions you're going to have to make, and you can't just go rely on your CIO to try and make all these business decisions. And so we started that dialogue with him, and that is different pedal. But communications, how we communicate, and then setting expectations of, as we're going through these things, people are people, and as if you're identifying things that bad actors may be exploiting, the people responsible for taking care of that may kind of start to get a little hesitant because the bad actors are probably exploiting something that they didn't do right or something they took a shortcut on. So personalities start coming back. And so coming from the outside in, I think you need to have multiple parties involved, understand, and convey agency. We can't do this on our own. We can't do this on our own. We need to bring in help ourselves, but lean on that help through incidents. Don't just try to take each one.
Awesome. Heard you mention possibly using the EC offline, the Maxon offline. So you're getting a lot of whys, how long we down, et cetera, et cetera. So can you talk to the biggest setbacks from either of those incidents? Operationally, financially, reputation. Speak to those setbacks.
So thankfully, obviously, we caught these before any real damage was done. And so there was no breach in this situation. But again, being able to go to and say, you have something that is on your infrastructure, we need to shut this down. In that situation, it was actually a lot easier because we could say, if we don't take care of this, this will probably turn into ransomware. So their leadership was very open to, yes, just shut it down. And we had to let them know this will take time. So obviously we can contain things very quickly, but the eradication and the recovery are going to take some time. In that case, leadership was okay with that because we caught it so late in the game. And candidly, it actually wasn't that long between where they pivoted and got to the DC. So we actually, I think, moved pretty quickly. The second situation where we detected it earlier, that's where all the different conversations, and I think that was a lesson learned for how do we communicate these things, because the rest of the environment isn't impacted. We've segmented this and contained this to an area, but then they're questioning, well, if we can function over here, why can't we do it here? So, obviously there's financial impacts. We have to bring in third parties to assist, but more of the impact is kind of the relationship impact. Honestly, in my opinion, is that sometimes you're asking them to do things they may not be prepared to do or be ready to do. And I said, you may be pushing on pieces where you're identifying something where something was wrong and trying not to alienate people in the conversations. They exploited where you had done something poorly, or especially with system admins, if you're identifying a practice they've been doing for years that got exploited, they're going to possibly kind of clam up a little bit. And so you have to be very careful about how you approach things. So the biggest setback is having, want to say relationship building, or relationship impacts, but I think there's a degree of that kind of subliminally is causing issues and so on.
It's a good response. Kind of feeds into my next question I was going to pose. You mentioned segmentation, which obviously is a good thing to help deter and I guess minimize the impacts of breaches and things like that. But kind of going further, without a second plan, who or what could have been done better to prevent either of those incidents? Like I said, I heard you mention segmentation, which obviously is a good thing. What else could have been done, or who could have taken a bigger role, et cetera, et cetera?
So one of the biggest things, and I know most of the CISOs in here from the States and just across the board, the basics. Following the basics are key from IT, and making sure, now that's where I kind of mentioned stepping in as the CIO role, how do we make sure the IT staffs are following the basics, doing best practice. Sometimes best practice is not the most convenient, and so folks are hesitant to do that, so we want to make sure, yes, this is best practice, yes, this is going to create more work for you, but the alternative is worse, and so trying to make sure that as we work through an incident, we're not necessarily assigning blame. We can do that as an investigation later into the incident, the after action, but working through the incident, you want to make sure you're focused on resolving the incident, getting operations back to normal, and focus on the blame and the investigation after the incident. Because you start doing that during the incident, you're getting people to just not want to show up and participate and respond to it.
Can I just jump into it? Two points I meant to make earlier that related to what Jeff was talking about. The thinking about cyber incidents, you really need to take an all hazards approach. And I know that over the years people talk about that, but a lot like you come from Florida, you're good at hurricanes, you know how to respond to hurricanes. So certain parts of the country, if you're in the fire department, you know how to respond to fire. Certain organizations are very good in certain states and different organizations. But the reality is if critical infrastructure goes down, I think that was coffee in Chicago here this morning, if critical infrastructure goes down, whether it's a cyber attack, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's fire, flood, tornado, natural disaster, you're going to have impacts. You're going to have business impacts. What hit us during the unexpected things that hit us during the power outage, we had a water crisis. We had to get water from one side of the state to the other, to Detroit. There were permit issues. There literally were people serving spoiled food in restaurants, and how were we going to work with the food inspectors during a blackout? Those are the things we didn't really think through. So I mentioned that only from this perspective, is your cyber teams working with emergency management is really important. They have really good processes. State police in many states have the Department of Emergency Management. But thinking through how you can coordinate with the different levels of government, how you can coordinate with the federal government. Literally during the power outage, we had President Bush up with a big screen talking to Governor Granholm at the time, literally coordinating with a federal response. So working that state, federal, local response, cross-sector, and then also just really thinking through how, as Jeff mentioned, it's not just the cyber team, it's legal, it's the business side, it's the governor's office, in our case. All these different organizations need to work together no matter what the incident is.
And I'll add to that. I mean, one of the things that we all know, it's not if, it's when. But there's still a degree with organizations that they want to think that it'll still never happen to them. So there is still a degree of conversations that will just prevent this from ever happening to us will be okay, and that's not realistic. And so how do we kind of change that conversation? No, this will. The game is continuing to get up. Just as last week we got an emergency directive from DHS regarding critical vulnerability, critical infrastructure that is the security device to an organization. That should be a wake-up call, and candidly, from my perspective, it's only going to get worse. And so we need to keep pressing and leaning on these conversations about when we be thinking in an alternative way. There will be times where we have to function without the network. And that's a hard conversation because everybody's so used to relying on what they have that they might not necessarily want to do that. And that is a very hard conversation.
But I think just one more quick point on that. One of the big lessons across all 30 stories that we had from Cyber Monday the day after, these are ransomware stories from Colonial Pipeline, big incidents we've had across the country. And everyone comes out with one of the top ones always, and all of them, was make failure real. Make failure real. And what do they mean by that? It's like organizations that have been through something like that, it changes the organization. And now I'm on the private sector side of it. You go in the room and you talk to individuals that have been through an incident, it's like laser focus. They understand, it's personal, their family was involved, they know what it was like. Those who haven't, they're kind of like, what are the donuts? It's literally, there's not the same level of focus. And it's hard to get it until someone's actually gone through it to make it real for them. But you're so right, Jeff. It's like, how do you give people that sense of urgency because they don't think it's going to happen to them?
That's excellent. I want to tie that together with a brief story. I spent a year in the United States Cyber Command planning exercises, Tier 1 exercises. For those of you who don't know, Tier 1 is, hey, this is FBI was with the president of type exercises. And ultimately, you did a couple things. Dan, you mentioned, hey, plan for people to be out. So our exercise scenario would go like this. Incident occurs, CISO's involved, NSA's involved, call the director of the FBI, no answer. Call secretary, no answer. Call vice president, no answer. So I can see the impact in that scenario that we were planning, where you have to coordinate and plan for strategic, absences. And then the basics, as you were saying, Jeff. So in that same scenario, when we couldn't reach those critical people, we turned right back to the person making the phone call and said, do your business. Do your business. And that period is your successful exercise. It's an exercise, so of course we're going to win, but it's a little game, isn't there? So, speaking of these incidents, this is for either of you. What are some hard truths that you've learned about these incidents? Whether they're framework conversation issues, whether they're hard to simulate realistic environments. What are some hard truths? Either of you.
Yeah, so I kind of go back and kind of on Dan's is IT person by trade, managing personalities and people and responses to crisis is not something we easily or readily train ourselves for. So hard truth is people will be people during emergencies, and so you get different responses and reactions from different people during these crises. So, and then, obviously, as I mentioned, we want to train ourselves to make cyber incidents as routine as possible, but there's a degree of novelty to each of them that we just can't prepare for. So how do we also coach and train folks that, they're the people you're going to rely on to help solve this issue may not show up. How do we cope and respond to that? Because that's out of people's comfort zone, and that's not something I want to think the process. So from a cyber perspective, we also got to recognize when we can't handle it and we need to tap out and ask for help, because we will get to a threshold where we, at a state perspective, I need to go lean on another agency to provide me resources to help support this other agency. Now we're starting to engage with other agencies and trying to get them to coordinate and volunteer giving up their resources, where they got mission critical stuff too. So a lot of managing the incident, to Dan's point, is outside of typically how IT operates, and we need to lean on our partners like emergency management to help us better coordinate and engage.
Yeah, great points. I would say two things. One thing that scares me the most right now is the frequent amount of turnover we have in our cyber teams and in our response teams. It's hard. It's hard in government right now with the shutdowns and state, local, federal level, budget issues. But the challenge of keeping that focus, it's so easy for all of us to say, been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Back in 2017, or I say back in 2003. Yeah, but the question is, are you ready now? And are you ready? And maybe your team was great 4 years ago. You had a rock star team and you were amazing. But I like to use a lot of sports analogies. Like, just because your team was great last year when we did X, Y, Z, or 2 years ago we had this fantastic, tabletop, and we had all these other foreign countries involved, and it was amazing. And but that team was all turned over. Now you've got a new team in place. You've got new partners, you have new contracts. This is constantly changing, and I use a sports analogy like this football. It's like, you think you're ready, but this is a totally different team than the team you had last year. And so that change makes it really hard. And are you prepared, you know, for the kickoff Sunday afternoon? Are you prepared? And it generally doesn't happen when we expect. You know, it's not going to be Tuesday with a cup of coffee saga at 9 a.m. It's going to be the Friday before Christmas at 10 p.m. at night that you get hit. You know, a lot of these ransomware attacks, a lot of the attacks that we're getting around the country, cyber attacks, are happening during holidays. And it's just very, very hard to prepare for that. And it's a state of constant readiness. I think that's the hard truth, is how do you have that constant readiness? And I think we're all challenged by it.
So I hear Jeff say more soft skills. You know, how do you handle the relationships between your team? Dan, I hear you say, hey, how do we prepare, how do we simulate 03 to 3 a.m. on one of the busiest days of the year? So really not so much in terms of just the framework organization, just more of the things we really can't control. You know, obviously soft skills, we can perfect those, et cetera, et cetera. But I did want to ask one final question to the panel. Jeff, you hit on it, Dan, you hit on it as well. Where does the third-party risk help or hinder your response? So you mentioned you had confirmation from the third party about potential incident. Speak to that.
Yeah, so anytime you're having a third party host or manage infrastructure, there's an extra layer. But you know, you always want a degree of trust but verify and putting layers of observation in place. But you know, obviously you want to bring as many people to the table and kind of resources the various possible different places. If there's places where you can increase oversight or visibility on the things, you're going to want that so you can protect things quicker. Obviously, you know, going through the risk mitigation strategies, risk transference, and getting people involved that may have more resources or capabilities than you is always a better option. So to the point of the resource harmonization, the more we can standardize and ensure people are following the basics, that gives us confidence that if there is an incident with the third party, they have the things in place to take care of it. So that's where, you know, things like GovRAMP kind of help, is that takes the audit burden off us for ensuring our vendors are doing the proper things. But we need to work closely with our partners so we can respond in a harmonious way and work together, because in most cases the states are moving away from doing so much on their own and bringing in third parties. It's a necessity for us to work closely with them.
Yeah, I think with the power outage of 03, it was it was an incident that happened in outside of Cleveland, Ohio, that all the dominoes fell and 50 million people lost power. It was a partner. It was a partner of all of ours, partner of a partner of a partner. But whether you're talking solar winds, whether you're talking what happened, I don't think he did vendors, but the CrowdStrike outage last year, and the big airport impact, all the different incidents that we face, they're almost all with third parties. And so thinking through those relationships can be a big help. And I think to your other point, so we mentioned one other thing, Ken, you mentioned they're outside of our control. But we can help train people. We can help people. This is what it's going to be like. Just like football teams prepare for where it's going to be loud. They bring in the wind, they bring in the fake rain, they bring in the noise, and they practice all those different things sports teams do to prepare for the environment they're going to be in. We can do a better job of training our employees. This is what could happen. This is what it's going to be like. Some people love that. I mean, they love that they can set their run to the fire. Other people, maybe this isn't for me. But I think challenging, working with partners, as we all know, we're reliant on our third-party suppliers. But the reality of it is that oftentimes it is those suppliers that are the cause of the incident in the first place. And then we have to practice with them. We have to practice just like we're going to play in the game. So bringing in the hospitals, bringing in the utilities, bringing in others, doing statewide exercises, practicing with our partners, because that's what the incident's going to look like.
Good. So practicing with partners, extend the outreach beyond what you think it will be, and then just regardless of harmonize. Make sure everybody has a shared understanding of the response and their role in the response. Excellent. Dan, you keep mentioning football.
Sorry.
We're in Chicago, and I'm a diehard Bears fan, so I'll pray for me.
realist in me says the bad actors are always going to be better resourced, better financed, better trained, and have no rules to follow. So we're always behind people. But I think, from the IT side, following the basics and best practices is the best thing we can do to reduce your exposure. But also spending and investing in one of the pieces that I kind of missed on earlier is a lot of folks practice on responding to the incident. They don't practice the recovery from incidents. And in most cases, we can contain and stop an incident rather quickly, but the forensics and the recovery can take a very prolonged, protracted period, which we're not prepared to communicate that to leadership. We're not really working through, okay, which systems need to cover, how we should be doing that as part of the PR. But every instance is going to be a little bit different in what they may take down. So, we don't practice the recovery enough. And so I think that is one place where I definitely miss more.
Yeah, I would focus on communications. We don't say that in the intro was who you're going to call. But there's so many assumptions that we have. Well, the cell phone's going to work. No, it's not. Well, I'm going to send an email. No, the email's dead. Well, I'm going to run to the local police station. So people don't even think through the basics. They just assume in an emergency, your cell phone's going to work. It's probably not going to work. You better have a backup. Email's down, network's down. Well, texting's down. Now what are you going to do? Who are you going to call? How are you going to get in touch with all those different people? What assumptions do you have? The assumptions you have around the basics is where I would focus my time. And so in a perfect utopian world, I would have some kind of communication that I know worked despite despite the cyber attack, despite the power outage, despite the big fire, despite the airport, whatever. How are you going to get in touch with the people? And then also, along those same lines, if they're not available, like you said, they don't pick up the phone, they're not there, I can't get a hold of Sarah, I can't get a hold of Bob, what do I do now? Think through that. Because there's an assumption you're making that you're going to be able to contact that person and it's going to be easy. It won't be easy and they may not answer the phone. Now what are you going to do? That's what I would focus on.
So if I had unlimited time and resources, I would do two things. One, as Dan said, we call that PACE plan in the military. Your primary, alternate, contingent, emergency. So you should have 4 layers of communication should an incident occur. Second thing I would do is I would do my hardest work in bringing all the stakeholders to the table to implement our incident response plan. Business partners, legal, et cetera, and make sure we're following a harmonized plan and response. So, we got unlimited resources. Conversely, most of our government agencies find themselves in the opposite. So, what do you recommend organizations are limited in either time, resources, or as usual, government goals?
I think the big thing is partnerships. Again, knowing there's other people out there that are willing to help and assist. We're all short on time, all short on resources, going to be losing resources based on funding issues, things like that. So both partners at different levels of government and within our industry partners as well. I think having those relationships, because in the interim state perspective, we're all trying to serve the citizen, no matter what levels of government. But at the same time, we need to offer up our partnership to our partners as well. So I think that is one of the core tenets that we need to kind of have as a guidepost and basically the core value elements.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think in an emergency, one thing I think that does happen with cyber emergencies, and we saw this, in the books I read, cyber ransomware, and also natural disasters, is all of a sudden the country, your state, your government is focused. So you have lack of resources, but now the whole world wants to help. So are you ready to even receive that help? So, boom, the hurricane just hit. Nobody cared about hurricanes in Michigan until now Florida's down. And so now we're sending all of our people to help restore power in Florida because there's compacts in place that allow us to do that during a hurricane, right? We do that naturally during emergencies. We need to do the same thing with cyber. Be ready if you get into that situation where I don't have resources, but I have an emergency and I have all these private sector partners, I have all these other states, I have all these other people around the country that want to help me get out of this situation. Am I ready to even receive that help? Am I ready? We all saw a picture back in I hate to use this analogy, but during 9/11, there were so many people that food spoiled in New Jersey because they never got into New York, all those big piles of food. The people were sending boxes of food, they didn't know what to do. And it just kind of sat in New Jersey and rotted, right? I mean, that's a bad analogy, but I mean, you get my point, is are you ready in those situations? People are gonna run to try and help you in that emergency, and are you ready for that help?
Okay. 2 sentences or less. Final question. You can type it, 2 sentences, great. If you can't, I understand. So, we kind of talked about it, but when an incident occurs, what's going to help your public defense? Jeff. All right, so we have 30 plus. I got 30 plus attempts. Andrew, what do you have to say?
I'd say know your resources, 2 sentences. Know your resources, know your strengths, and know your weaknesses.
And I'll add to kind of the end, know your resources, but know who you're going to call. And know who your partners are.